Welcome everyone. As I said, you have instructions in the chat, all the necessary links. We're gonna start this OSPOlogy session, March OSPOlogy session, that is gonna be about building an OSPO in the energy sector. That's the topic of today. And for this meeting, we have two special guests from Alliander, Nico and Jonas. They will be sharing some of the remarks of building an OSPO at Alliander. First of all, just to let you know that we have an open discussion of this meeting in the OSPO forum. So you can go to the link I dropped you there and ask questions or share useful resources that you think are important for today's meeting. One of the first things that has been happening during these weeks is that the Tutor Group, in collaboration with LF Research, has released a new study of the evolution of OSPOs that includes new OSPO maturity model, OSPO use cases from companies such as Comcast, Bloomberg, or Ports, and also a set of OSPO architects that tries to define different OSPOs based on OSPO behavior, as well as a useful OSPO checklist. Also, I have leave you where the links where people can download this new study, the blog article, and also this content has been added in the OSPO guide. I would like to let you know that this is not a static study, and we welcome the community to keep adding new content and new ideas of how to improve this guide, maybe by adding new archetypes that come from non-company perspective, or adding new resources for the different stages of this 5-stage maturity model. On the other hand, there is one more week to go or 2 more weeks to go for submit your proposals for OSPOCon in North America. There are new OSPO discussions in the OSPO forum. We have new to-do general members this week, Dynatrace, IT Renew, and Equinix. And in the contributor section, we have an important activity, an important meeting that we have just released that are the to-do workdays. And we have opened these meetings for AMER time zone, friendly time zones, and APAC and EMEA friendly time zones. The AMER time zones will be facilitated by one of the to-do community members, that it's Dwayne, and I will be facilitating the ones for APAC and EMEA. It's basically a place where all the community can gather and work in progress study guides or white papers, expose more ideas, or also try to start contributing to tutor resources. So this is for seasoned OSPOers and also to new contributors that maybe wants to start learning how to get started into the tutor community. Last but not least, also remind you that if you want to participate in OSPOlogy sessions, you can do so by presenting COFO papers. Maybe this can be like presenting a work in progress project that your OSPO is doing or your open source initiative is working at. Share the OSPO journey that your company has been facing so far. Share open source management best practices that has worked for you in the past and you want to share with the community and get feedback from that. I also dropped you the link in case people want to make a submission. And if you want to keep learning more about OSPOlogy, every single month we share a newsletter that is called OSPO News, where we try to keep up to date every one of the latest OSPO news. Saying this, let's go to the topic of the month. Jonas and Nico sharing building an OSPO in the energy sector and share some of the experiences that they have been facing at Alliander.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me and Nico here today. And we are really excited to share our experience with you, and hopefully you can learn something from it. Let's start with a quick introduction. I'm Jonas van der Bogaert. solution architect at Alliander and also one of Alliander's members of the OSPO. And I'm here today with Nico.
As also part of the OSPO, I've been doing open source since about 2014 in various community projects, but I had the opportunity for about a year ago to also do that at Alliander.
And for those who are not familiar with Alliander, let me give you a short overview. Alliander is the largest distribution system operator in the Netherlands, and we as Alliander develop and operate energy networks. It means that we are responsible for nearly 6 million customer connections. We manage over 90,000 kilometers of electricity grid and over 40,000 kilometers of gas grid. And you can say that is our key task to make sure both the Dutch household but also the companies have access to energy at all times and can also stay warm. Today, we're not going to talk about what an OSPO is and why you need an OSPO. But what we're going to talk about in this session is what our journey was building an OSPO and what our OSPO ambitions will be for 2020. And we also will be introducing LF Energy to you. First, I will dive into the key challenges a distribution system operator like Alliander is facing today. Next, I will share why we started an OSPO. And after that, I will introduce LF Energy. Then we'll share what our key OSPO activities are, and Nico will tell you more about our journey. And Nico will end the presentation with our OSPO ambitions for 2020. And hopefully, if you're good in time, there will also be room for some questions and discussion at the end. So let's get started with the key challenges a distribution system operator like Alliander is facing today. We see that in 10 years' time, the way we live, work, and travel won't be the same. And this is necessary because fossil fuels are becoming more scarce and have a growing impact on our environment. And you already see that everywhere in the world, new initiatives are emerging to conserve energy and make it more sustainable. And we as Alliander see that the way we generate, distribute, and use energy is changing very rapidly. And this leads that distribution system operators like Alliander has to face major challenges to support this transition. Fossil fuel power systems stations are closing down in order to reduce CO2 emissions. We already see an enormous increase in wind energy, solar panels, and the emergence of electric cars. And also, we see that we have to make smarter and more use of residential heat. Alliander is actively responding to all these changes and innovating to produce new digital solutions to support this transition. And by investing in digitalization, Alliander aims to make the energy network smarter. And this to make sure we are not only ready for today's situation, but also for tomorrow's. And one of the themes in Alliander's digitalization strategy to smart energy network is co-creation. And we were really excited that co-creation was in Alliander's digitalization strategy, because co-creation can be seen as a form of collaborative innovation where ideas are shared and improved together rather than kept to oneself. And this was one of the enablers for us to getting high-level management attention to open source. This because open source is very closely connected to co-creation and is also more and more seen as one of the means for more co-creation at Alliander. The next step was that we drafted the first version of Alliander's open source strategy. And this movement towards open source was then further strengthened by Alliander's decision to join LF Energy. And later in our presentation, I will tell you more about what LF Energy is and how it helps us. After joining LF Energy and releasing our first open source project under the umbrella of LF Energy and co-organizing an open source bootcamp event with LF Energy, we started to recognize the need within Alliander for a group of people with know-how and a mandate to help bring structure to an organization to the open source ambitions and plans. So that led that some open source enthusiasts came together, myself included, and decided to start an OSPO. So it started small, but this luckily was very positively retrieved by high-level management and then further formalized in the organization. Now let me shortly introduce LF Energy to you. LF Energy is an open source foundation focused on the power system sector, hosted within the Linux Foundation. And the goal of LF Energy is to provide a neutral and collaborative community to build shared digital investments that will transform the world's relation to energy and make it more sustainable. So how does LF Energy help us in our transition to more open source at Alliander? And there are four things that stand out for us. First, LF Energy provides us a neutral ecosystem to host our open source projects and collaborate with other organizations within and outside the energy sector. Second, LF Energy provides us with the know-how on how to best leverage and adopt open source best practices. And third, LF Energy also provides us help with IP and legal related questions. And fourth, and maybe that's even one of the most important ones, LF Energy is also a great network organization to get in touch with other organizations within the energy sector working on open source or thinking about starting to work on open source. Today, LF Energy has over 50 members, and this includes distribution system operators like RTE, Tenet, EnergyNet, and StatNet, but also several universities, both in Europe and in America, and also a few large corporates like Microsoft, Google, and GE. And also the number of projects, of energy-focused projects under the umbrella of LF Energy is growing. Since 2018, there has been already over 15 projects adopted by LF Energy. And this includes projects in the domain of energy forecasting, but also in other domains like demand and response, and many more. And for more information on LF Energy and LF Energy projects, please visit the LF Energy website. I will make sure that the last slide of our presentation that is shared in GitHub contains a link to the LF Energy website. So back to the OSPO at Alliander. The OSPO at Alliander is the center knowledge of open source and inner source with Alliander. This means that we aim to be the place in Alliander for questions about open source licensing, criteria for selecting open source software, and information on how to participate in open source or inner source communities. Second, OSPO is responsible for Alliander's open source strategy. And we don't aim our open source strategy to be a one-time thing, but we aim to update it on a yearly basis. And third, together with the enterprise architect team, we advise on the strategic merit of where to use open source solutions, which open source projects to participate in, and which internal projects to actively open source and maintain. And this goes because we believe that open source projects should only be done if it has strategic merit, because it can be costly. Fourth, as OSPO, we enabling co-creation of open source software through collaboration with open source bodies like LF Energy. Fifth, we also actively promote the use and awareness of open source and inner source software, both within Alliander but also outside Alliander. For example, via blogs, webinars, and sessions like this one. Especially in the early phase, we put a lot of effort in creating awareness around open source and inner source within Alliander. Six, we are addressing the risk and importance of compliance with open source software. A good example is our OSPO review checklist. This checklist contains commonly encountered licenses and explains how to treat code published under them. This helps the teams to review and choose open source software more wisely, saving them time and effort, and also reducing risk for Alliander as a whole. 7, we are enabling community meetings if and where possible. This includes organizing meetings with other companies active in the power system sector to share ideas and explore possibilities to collaborate or to invest new opportunities to work together on open source communities. And to tell you more about our OSPO journey and our OSPO ambitions, I will now hand over the presentation to Nika.
Thank you, Jonas. I'll tell you something about the sort of the journey we went through as the OSPO. Let me start off by saying I had a brief look in the meantime by the maturity model that Anna was referring to, and I like it. At the same time, I see us doing things all over the place. We're doing things ad hoc adoption, evangelizing, hosting our own projects, because we see need on all these fronts. I think the main point I want to communicate to you in the following slides is to say the road can be very messy, and also based on the opportunities that arise. I think, as Jonas was saying, in 2020, it was kicked off when we started the OSPO, and that's when open source really became institutionalized at Alliander. One of the first notable activities activities was the hackathon we did, and it was together with RTE France, a large grid operator from France. That was for the two projects, Operator Fabric, one that was developed by RTE originally, and GXF, the Grid Exchange Fabric, that was originally a project by Alliander. And in this hackathon, we, besides working on code, I think it also strengthened the collaboration between those two organizations and thereby the collaboration that is LF Energy. So I think that was a good start for the future that is now the present. Later that year in June, I think that resembles the maturity model you see. We started collecting all the information to make it available for everybody within Alliander. That included some legal aspects like a reviewed license checklist to help colleagues, especially developers, to say what can you use when you adopt source code, or what do you use in terms of licenses when you publish source code. In later 2020, we expanded this wiki. So besides the review checklist, we also included best practices, and these included other aspects of open source. So what kind of, say you want to start a project, what kind of organizational support do you need? You probably need some management to commit to it for a longer period before you can actually open source it. What kind of documentation requirements do we have for the project we release? Stuff like that. And then, having gained some practical experience at the time, we thought it was a great opportunity to host a webinar for our colleagues. And so we did an internal webinar about open source. It was a very wide scope, and we talked about, well, the principles and licenses, about the open source way of work. And of course, we gave some examples of software we already had in use, from small utilities on the desktop to server software. It could be a variety of things that people could recognize. And of course, it was a great stage to highlight the project we already had open sourced, or we were going to. And similarly to our internal webinar, we hosted one publicly about Operator Fabric together with RTE and LF Energy later that year. We got some process down on the webinar front at that time. And then in 2021, taking those lessons, we wrote our first open source strategy. As Jonas was already saying, this is something that's ongoing. Still, we keep on improving and iterating. But I think it really helped us communicate with management, especially, to have a strategy and have a sort of a higher level point of view, rather than just focusing on the project side of things. And up until that point, we had some public experiences with the various webinars we had, but there was nothing to refer to. So you were saying in the webinar, you can look us up at or this specific GitHub project, but there was no single point of contact. And that's why we said we need a dedicated place on the website. So now if you go to alliander.com/open source, with whether it's English or Dutch, you can actually get a list of our activities and projects, and they will be updated shortly in the near future to represent the new projects we have ongoing. Again, to iterate on a previous work, we started the license checking and come up with a process for it, and automating that as far as possible. And we got heavily inspired by the open source software reporting toolkit project, collaborating with not only say, is this a license we like, but also in what kind of context can you use those licenses? So it's more refined, and we are working to automate the checking of the projects we use and open up. And July of 2021, we hosted our own project that was not under the LF Energy flag. That was the Weather Provider API, because it's a bit not the correct name. It might be get a name change in the future, but it's general weather information, so it's not energy specific. As a way of launching that, we hosted a webinar, and we got some great collaboration with one of the meteorological institutes in the Netherlands already. And internally, to focus on a whole other aspect of something we consider part of the OSPO, the inner source community, we focused on increasing the discoverability of projects using dashboard. And we adopted Project Portal dashboard that was originally developed by SAP. And well, we deployed that internally, and it encouraged people to open up their repositories for collaboration, actually start inviting colleagues over to join in their efforts. And it's sort of accelerating that at the end of 2021 and the beginning of this year, we launched even more projects. So we have Shapeshifter, OpenStaff, and the Power Grid model. So there might be more in the future. So it's going rather well. For now, we'll be focusing on making these projects successful, and also on the same to embed open source in our company. And as I said, it is very iterative, and therefore I also think that our OSPO is sort of fitting Alliander, because you build the OSPO to meet the needs of the organization. Now, for this year, and maybe also the future. We focus, of course, to make open source a success at Alliander. And we do this as an OSPO mostly by, on the left side, you see informing, coaching, and educating, because we don't have the resources to do everything ourselves. And we also want to embed it in the organization. So we're more the coaching bystander, and leaving everything as much as possible to the teams themselves. And in green, we will continue to make these projects a success. So both open source projects and inner source projects. And we do so in multiple ways, by promoting the website, the project with websites and webinars, and by monitoring the projects and the community metrics we've going, to see if our efforts are successful, or maybe we should adjust them, and by improving the project quality. And that could be security. That's quite important in the energy sector. I mean, it's critical infrastructure most of the times, but also documentation so people can get started right away. And the organizational level shown in red, there's 3 main goals we defined for this year. For especially the colleagues involved in procurement, we want to help them with some guidance, because procuring open source can be rather different than procuring other software with licenses and contracts. We will increase our efforts still on the license checks and compliance. And we will continue with supporting the inner source efforts with tools and best practices. And we think that both these efforts on the project level and on the organizational level will reinforce each other, because the projects, they are supported by the open source friendly policy that is embedded in the organization. And of course, then the experiences of the projects help refine these organizational structures. And in doing so, more and more colleagues will gain hands-on experience with open source. And so this is the outlook for 2022, where we're working on. And I think that's will conclude our presentation.